morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. As you probably saw yesterday, Dwayne Johnson is so excited to play Shazam, he couldn't keep his mouth shut for just a few more days. And thus yet another aspect of Warner Brothers' Hall H presentation is spoiled in advance. They just have the worst luck. I did a video yesterday on who will win Comic-Con, and of course the big contenders at the front of the pack are Marvel versus DC. And a number of you pointed out that DC is at a huge disadvantage because all their cards are now on the table in advance, and Marvel can just glance over and then prepare their Hall H presentation, which is still super top secret, at their leisure, totally knowing their opponent's strategy and game plan. It is really quite a disadvantage for Warner Brothers, and I hope for their sake and for our sake, we want to see like a good fight. We don't want to see someone just get bowled over with no competition. I hope they've been able to keep something big a secret. But I'm sure that whoever's putting together their Hall H presentation was just like, Dwayne, I'm gonna kill you. Because he didn't actually say he was going to do it, but he all but confirmed that he would. In interviews and press interviews, because of course Dwayne Johnson is making the rounds for Hercules. And I'll get to that in a moment. But the thing is that he confirmed something that nobody really suspected. So it would have been a big headline at Comic-Con just this coming week. It starts Thursday, and Saturday is Warner Brothers' presentation. It would have been a big deal to announce that Dwayne Johnson would be playing Shazam because people thought he might be Lobo. They thought maybe he'd be, the new Green Lantern. Maybe they're going to get. They've confirmed that it's going to stay Hal Jordan, but maybe Jon Stewart would be in the mix somewhere. Maybe he'd be Martian Manhunter. People were putting him towards a more serious character, but DC has decided to put him as Shazam, Billy Batson, which is not a very serious character. It's a comedic role because it's, if you're not familiar with who Shazam is, it's a little boy who, when he says Shazam, is struck by lightning, gets all these powers, and he has the body of an adult superhero, but he's still the mind of a little boy. It's basically big superhero style, which I guess maybe fits with Dwayne Johnson's strengths as an actor, at least how audiences want to see him. And maybe that's what's going on here. As you can see, the darker version of Dwayne Johnson doesn't seem to be too compelling to audiences, as it's being predicted that Lucy will easily take the #1 spot from Hercules this weekend, which is quite shocking when you think, if you were to go back in time and say one day Scarlett Johansson will totally beat Dwayne Johnson at the box office when they're both in action movies. You'd be like, that's ridiculous. But that's how popular the Marvel brand is, that her role as Black Widow is beginning to carry over into her other works, at least when they're somewhat similar. And maybe Dwayne Johnson sees that and says, I need to get on board one of these comic book trains because they're leaving the station without me. So he's hopped on the DC train. And I guess one of the ways they were able to convince him is they gave him a solo movie. As Nikki Fink, spilled the beans a couple of weeks ago, a Shazam solo movie is in DC's slate, if that's true, but it's widely confirmed to be true. So I guess that's how, they convince him, and I guess maybe that's how they're bringing a lot of actors over there. They're like, you'll get a solo movie? Or like Oprah, you'll get a solo movie. And let's just hope these solo movies are good, and they weren't just used to bribe people to sign on for DC, which still has to prove it's not a sinking ship. Or at the very least, one that just can't get off the ground. So what do I think? I mean, I'm not sure about, I like it and I don't. I do think that Dwayne Johnson's very good at comedy. He did a great job as the Tooth Fairy and the Game Plan. On SNL, whenever he appears, he's quite funny, and he's really game. He's not ashamed to do these things. He could be hilarious. So I can see him easily doing the childlike elements of Billy Batson and playing someone who is a kid. Also, some of you said you really liked making Shazam multiracial, and that will be the second multiracial character. We'll see if Dwayne Johnson addresses that, though. I once asked him a question about that in an interview for Snitch, and he just did not want to talk about it at all. And I was talking about it in a very positive way, as being a role model, it was wonderful, and he was just like, it's like it's the first anyone who ever said that to him or he'd ever heard it. So for those of you who are excited about having a multiracial Shazam, be aware that Dwayne Johnson might not want to go there. And I guess that's a mixed bag, but he should see how much love Hiro Hamada is getting for being mixed race, half Japanese, half Caucasian. So we'll see. But it definitely changes the Billy Batson character. He's Caucasian in the comics. This isn't a change that I have a problem with as long as the movie's well made. I think Shazam, I have to say, Shazam is not a well-established character. He has his fans, and I thought the recent Jeff Johns, Gary Frank backup story that ran in Justice League New 52 for a while was well done. However, and he is a foster kid. And I think that might, the diversity of foster kids should be addressed. And so Dwayne Johnson might speak to that. And I think that would be great. But the character character, he's never really caught on. DC's pushing him very hard in the comics and their animated movies, but for some reason, I've just never really liked him. Maybe Dwayne Johnson will be what it takes to make him awesome, but, people also thought he might be Black Adam, who's the villain opposite Shazam, which is a much cooler, badass role. But Black Adam's supposed to be Middle Eastern, but The Rock definitely could have played that. I think The Rock maybe, if I were Dwayne Johnson, I maybe would have not jumped the gun, and I wish maybe, the more I think about it, he would be a fantastic Apocalypse over in the X-Men universe. But now he's stuck over in DC land, and I hope he didn't make a horrible mistake. So while I think Dwayne Johnson has wanted to go darker, and maybe some audiences have wanted to see him go darker, it's just not working out, so he has to embrace the light, and Shazam is a very light character. But I still am not convinced this is going to work out, and now that I think about it, I think the Apocalypse route would have been so much better for Dwayne Johnson to go. And they could have put his face on a skinny little body like Chris Evans in the beginning of Captain America. It would have been really awesome. But instead, let's see if he can pull off Shazam. If he does, he'll definitely make the character his own because it's not established well enough on its own. He won't be just taking on the mantle. He will become Shazam. So I'm rooting for him, but I behind my back, I'm getting ready to console him when it doesn't work out. All right, so that's the first story of the day. I'm very curious what you guys think of this casting news. And what do you think of Warner Brothers, all their stories being spilled before their Comic-Con presentation? All right, so the second story of the day, it's an all comic book news story day to some degree, or Comic-Con friendly. Expect that as we head into Comic-Con because there are going to be so many stories popping up. And if you want to ask me specific Comic-Con questions, this is the time to do it because we all have Comic-Con in the brain through the weekend. So the next one is about Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. Now, Nicholas Yanes sent me the link on Twitter to this really great story on Entertainment Weekly about how they were handling her pregnancy. They said she's quite pregnant to the point where they'd have to pay someone in a digital effects house to flatten her stomach so that she looked like she wasn't pregnant if they were going to have any wide shots. And that I think it's very clear. We're going to get into some of the specifics as to what Marvel is doing, but this pregnancy is quite expensive for Marvel Studios. They're like, wow, we had to add like an extra $10 million to our budget just because Scarlett Johansson got knocked up. But I think the plus side is, and what's very commendable, is that they didn't. She's supposed to have a big role here, and I'm very excited about some of the things that were revealed. By the way, if you don't want to know anything about the Avengers Age of Ultron, you might want to skip to the next story. This is not spoilers, but it's a little bit of insider information. But they could have shortened her role and cut it down and rewritten the script, but I think it shows a lot of integrity that they kept her in, didn't punish her for being pregnant, and also they didn't do any last-minute sloppy rewrites. They respected the integrity of what they came up with and what they'd written, and I think that's very promising. So when they can, they do close-ups. They said she's not going to be carrying grocery bags and large handbags, which is what they do on television shows when actresses get pregnant. Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Deborah Messing on Will and Grace. You've seen all that happen. Of course, Grace Kelly, I forget the name of it's called a Kelly bag. I forget what fashion house makes it, but she became famous for carrying an oversized handbag to cover up her pregnancy when she was pregnant with Prince Rainier's baby from Monaco. So that's an interesting little side bit of information. So anyway, also they're using some costume choices, like have her in civilian clothes. They choose high-waisted cocktail dresses, which have a lot of fluff to them, so you can kind of hide what's going on there. Then the other thing they do, and this is fascinating to me, they have 3 stunt doubles for her. And while they look a lot like Scarlett Johansson, they have the added benefit of having dots put on their face, so they can digitally add Scarlett Johansson's face to their bodies in post. And I'm like, why did Scarlett Johansson even show up for work today? And they said that, well, Johansson didn't want to be interviewed for this Entertainment Weekly article. They saw her on set, and she was being really nice and hanging out with her stunt doubles, and I thought that was really nice. They said like Scarlett and her mini-me's. And I thought that was really, really commendable of her, and I think things like that only help her seem like a nicer, more accessible person. So good for her. I think the Black Widow role is doing that on screen as well. She's doing a very nice job with it, very unassuming. So I think that's fascinating. They've gotten to that level. And if you've ever watched the demo reel, a special effects demo reel for the first Avengers, there are a couple scenes where they use totally fully computer animated stunt doubles, and they just basically animate the action sequence like a video game. And it's just amazing to see how far movies are coming along and why they're able to make these superhero movies. They still can't convincingly make someone fly, though. They came pretty close in Man of Steel, but a lot of superheroes fly, and I think we want to get to the point where we can see mid-air battles, mid-air discussions that don't, you can't clearly see where the wires are attached and they just erase them. So I think that's the next frontier, and I think it's interesting that that's being held up. I wonder what is is holding it up, considering what else they're capable of in the special effects departments. So the other bit of information that I really liked is they said in this movie, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, her job is to kind of be the bodyguard for Bruce Banner, for Mark Ruffalo's Bruce Banner. Just like she went and found him in the first movie and had to escape from him when he hulked out, he was kind of her responsibility. They're continuing that situation where she's in charge of, they said, making sure he doesn't go green. And I thought that was fantastic. So the scene they were shooting, she was firing her gun from behind the minibar at Tony Stark's apartment, or Avengers Tower, I think, which is now, Tony Stark's apartment is now Avengers Tower, but a bunch of Ultrons, and Bruce Banner is now down on the floor doing breathing exercises to try and stay calm, because he knows all the different ways to try and keep him from hulking out. And they know the scientific ways. And I thought that was really great. I thought that really showed a lot of cleverness. It was shorthand. You didn't have a lot of backstory, but it was, I think, the special touch that Joss Whedon puts in here, where he explores, what these superhero aspects mean for these people every day or long term. Not just, I can punch stuff, but how would I keep from hulking out? And what would they need to assign to me at the Avengers to protect me? And also, how lucky is Scarlett Johansson that she keeps getting these great assignments. She did a phenomenal job in Captain America: The Winter Soldier. She could have been tasked to be the Avengers ambassador to Asgard for Thor 2: The Dark World and been involved in that mess, but she avoided that and got to jump onto the good movie. And if they get a Hulk movie and Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow is supposed to be his protector, will she pop up there? Although not if it's a Planet Hulk storyline, which is what I'm rooting for. But all very interesting. So I'm curious to what you guys think. Do you like that Marvel's going so far out of their way to work with Johansson despite her very visible pregnancy? Do you think that that's, it's too much of an expense and too much of an inconvenience to the other actors? Although they all said they don't mind at all, and they think everything that's being done is lovely, and they're very happy with the product. And also, what do you think of how far technology's come, and where do you think it maybe still needs to go? I mentioned the flying thing, but have you noticed any other deficits? All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story, a lot of you pointed out to me that J.J. Abrams has released another video for the Force for Change. Also, there was a really good one between Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart promoting this as well. I guess a lot of people aren't donating and don't want us to be on, look at Star Wars. I've told you before, there's very little interest online in this movie. I'm not quite sure why, but I think it's very troubling. And I think that perhaps instead of these Force for Change videos, which of course are for a good cause, they need to start releasing some information about the movie, like costume designs or maybe something, who someone's playing. Because, we know a lot more about Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which comes out in summer 2016, and Star Wars Episode 7 is a holiday 2015 release. So they should really need to, I think there's such a thing as being too secretive. At least maybe the title for the movie, right? I don't know what's going on here, but I did like seeing this Force for Change spot. I'll put a link to that and the Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart one in the video description. But they're very entertaining, and I do love the practical special effects that are on display. That they actually built an X-wing. I love that little robot that comes across at the end, and I like J.J. Abrams' demeanor. I think he's having fun with this, but I think he needs to remember that he is certainly, people are excited about him, but he's not even sticking around for the next two films. Ryan Johnson from Looper is taking over, Looper and Brick. So with J.J. Abrams, don't make yourself such a big part of the mythology because you're leaving. Stand aside. I think perhaps people will be much more interested to see maybe older Han Solo, what he looks like, maybe talking about Force for Change. I think while I admire wanting to play up the practical special effects and what the behind the camera people are doing, people want to see what's going to be in front of the camera. I guess to some degree you are, but so anyway, I like these. I think they're good, but I think that this ad campaign, as entertaining as these little spots are, and as good as good they are, the good they're doing, they need to move forward to try and do something to get people more excited about this. People weren't even that excited about the casting of Lupita Nyong'o and Gwendolyn Christie. I just don't know what's going to tip the scales, and they're not presenting at Comic-Con this year either. I guess they're going to wait for Comic-Con 2015, but to have no Star Wars panel, I think is problematic. D23, I think it's every other year, so there will be a D23 next year, I believe. Maybe they'll want to do a lot there, and of course that means Disney will largely sit out Comic-Con next year so they can draw attention to D23 like they did last year. But I just feel Comic-Con is a really big deal, and they do a great job with Marvel. I think Star Wars needs to start having their presence felt there as well. People need to feel the Force at Comic-Con. All right, so those are the three stories of the day. I have a great, very interesting viewer question from Kevin King. And Kevin says, "Hi, Grace. I got a quick question for your consideration. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I was wondering if, given the success of Frozen and the somewhat poor showing of the last few Pixar efforts, does Disney really need two separate animation studios these days? Do you think it's time for Disney to merge both studios together into one? Fascinating question, and someone had written back to you like, that's ridiculous, right away. But I thought you have something here, Kevin, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere, even in the back of a Disney executive's mind, they were mulling this over. Maybe even John Lasseter can see the writing on the wall. I think Pixar has a couple more films, to prove itself. They're already slated: Inside Out, The Good Dinosaur. They keep putting out these Toy Story shorts. One was just announced yesterday about their holiday special that features dinosaurs, and the rumor is to play into The Good Dinosaur to try and draw attention to that film. But I think that Pixar's got to be kicking themselves because they really listened to Disney's advice with sequels, and while they got some box office out of that, I think they really hurt themselves in terms of their credibility with animation fans and then even eventually mainstream audiences. The bulk of fans, I think, really have kind of not come to see Pixar the way they once did. I mean, I think we can all remember going to see those first Pixar films that became huge event films. I mean, before the Marvel and DC movies where everyone was like, you have to see it opening weekend, that's what Pixar was. And Pixar's clearly lost that. So, and of course, they never wanted to go down this sequel path. It was a big bone of contention, and it's why Pixar eventually wanted to split up from Disney, but Disney didn't want that to happen and offered them a huge check, and they reluctantly were bought out. Just too much money to say no to, and of course, Steve Jobs, who co-founded, I believe, Pixar, offered a seat on the Disney board. It was just too much to pass up, and so Disney said, we're going to make sequels because we own the rights to the movies you made with us anyway, so you can either help us make those sequels or watch us make them by ourselves. And Pixar was like, oh, you got us. It's kind of like dealing with the mob, Mickey Mouse mob. So, but I think that Pixar maybe didn't hold their ground enough. They didn't continue to fight the battles they needed to fight. And maybe it's because John Lasseter stepped back to oversee both Pixar and Disney Animation that they kind of lost their compass. They lost their way. Also, there's, of course, the rumor that Pixar ran out of ideas, that they sat down early on in the process and they dreamed up all their initial movies on a napkin. That's the legend. And they've exhausted the napkin, and they just can't come up with anything else. And of course, some of their best talents have moved over to live action. Brad Bird is over at live action, although there's rumors, Bob Iger says they're making an Incredibles 2, but I won't believe it until it actually happens, or I see them going into pre-production. And then, of course, Andrew Stanton, he's coming back for Finding Dory, but he took a big break to try and do John Carter, which was a spectacular disaster because he took a lot of Pixar people with him, and of course didn't have the necessary backup with live action experienced people to help him out. And then he just quit. So I think that Pixar, that's kind of what happened. They tasted success. They had a lot of their talent go out to live action. They listened to Disney studio suits maybe a little bit too closely, and they've really hurt their brand. Now, can they come back? If they make a great movie, they can, but we'll have to wait and see. And I also think, as Kevin King pointed out, Disney Animation has suddenly seriously stepped up their game. A lot of us didn't like Frozen, but more people loved it. And it's just such a big deal and so iconic at this point that I think it's become bigger than the film. It's become a phenomenon. And I think that has to be recognized. And I think Big Hero 6 looks surprisingly good. In fact, it looks like the kind of movie that Pixar would make. And I pointed that out in my review of the Japanese trailer for Big Hero 6, that you might have a situation, as some other people were saying, where the student has become the master. And I think that's where Kevin's coming from. Why continue to have these two competing animation houses? Now, they didn't roll up Disney Animation when Pixar was beating the crap out of it, so I think they owe Pixar the shot to fight back. And maybe Disney likes this in-house competition, although I hope Pixar realizes this is a competition because they're just hobbling here. I'm like, get back in there and fight, Pixar. It sounded like Marvel versus DC. So maybe Disney wants to foster that kind of, I guess they're probably going to say friendly competition, but there's so much at stake, I don't know how friendly it could possibly be. But I think if you were to fold them into each other, how do you lose the Pixar brand? I think that's valuable in and of itself. I'm not quite sure what you could do. I think that Pixar, I think they need to, what they really should do is, instead of combining them, I think they need to really make it very clear what the purpose of each studio is. That's what I would do. I would be like, okay, Disney Animation, you're going to go make the big, the Frozens, the Big Hero 6s, the real popcorn flicks. They're very well made, they have heart. I'm not saying you can't make quality entertainment, but you're going to go for the blockbusters, the summer blockbusters. I want you to have a summer mindset. And then I would say to Pixar, you need to go back and refocus on being the awards winner. Now, you can still make a lot of money too, but you need to be focusing on asking the big questions, having the more sophisticated storytelling. And that's how I think they should be divided. You should be, Disney, you should just be doing great fun animation. Pixar, you should be put Paperman over at Pixar. I bet they'd get it done, the Paperman technology that we're all waiting on. I think maybe that's what it is. Maybe they need clear marching orders, because right now they're like, why do you have two people doing the same job for the same studio? It's just confusing. So I think it is a problem for Disney, and I'm curious to how you guys would solve it. Do you agree that there's a problem? And so would you give them clear marching orders? Would you combine them? I just think it's an interesting thing to discuss. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.